Now, in 2005, David Foster Wallace delivered this talk in Kenyon Community College. And he started the talk with a parable. The parable goes like this. There are two fish swimming in the water, right? And upon their travels, they meet an older, more tired fish. And the tired fish goes up to them and says, "Hey, watch the water out there." A moment passes. And eventually they start parting ways. And after some time, the two fish go to each other and say, "Hey, what the hell is water?" Welcome to this talk. This talk was called Engineering Kindness, but in hindsight, I should have called it Community Gardening in Tech. I just forgot to change the title. My name is John Contad. I've spent 17 years in sysadmin and DevOps, 12 of those years contributing directly and 5 years in a various mix, from platform to API to enablement teams. I'm currently in service of Open Universities Australia, which is a nonprofit, which is a job that I really, really like at the moment. I've put some markers of video games released at around those career milestones. So I started work at around the time that Nintendogs came out. And yes, Zelda was 5 years ago. I'm really sorry if that causes an existential angst. Yeah, I promise there's going to be only a few more. What am I going to be talking about today? I'm going to be talking about a couple of things, but mainly the stack of the issues around modern software development life, the problems that we get with getting alignment with other people, dealing with a lot of dependencies, and what people sometimes mean when they talk and say, "Hey, I left because of the politics." I'm going to be proposing a couple of mitigations to those issues framed around the metaphors of gardening, right? And finally, if there's any part of this talk that I hope stays with you, I think it's the last part. I'm going to be talking about why this matters, maybe to you as a person, not from a productivity or better communities perspective, but just to you. But we're going to start with a little bit of a thought experiment. And the thought experiment goes like this. Let's say you and a friend, right, in software development. You have different sensibilities, things that you believe to be true, and we placed you in a similar team, right, in the same team, actually, for an arbitrary amount of time, let's say 3 years. And in those 3 years, you experienced similar things. You came in and there was a really slow testing suite that took about like a couple of hours to finish. You had a bug, you had an incident together. I would posit that by the end of that exercise, you would have similar, not completely, but similar sensibilities about how to do certain things or what's correct. Now let's say we flip it to the opposite. There's now, instead of two different people, there's two copies of you as derived from the snapshot of you right now. Everything that you believe in, everything that you've experienced, everything that you hold to be true. And we place those two people in two different teams for the same 3 years. And those two teams had different experiences. One of you had incredibly slow testing suite. One had a lot of time to ship. And the other you had a delivery crush where people were just like, "Hey, we have this deadline and we got to hit it and we got to work at it," right? And only one of you had information disclosure issues. I would posit that by the end of that exercise would be two slightly different developers, maybe even completely, depending on which school of thought you follow. And what I'm trying to kind of say here is a lot of the things that we believe in are derived from the externalities or the things that we kind of experience. In fact, there's a thing that gets bandied about. Lindsay Holmwood, if you can hear this, thank you. I think you delivered this about like 3 years ago, and I still remember it. But basically what it talks about is the fact that the artifacts that an organization creates, the processes or like the software, right, are influenced by the inherent values of the people that make them. And those values are derived from the basic assumptions that people have, right? And vice versa. It can flow one of two ways. Now, for example, if you have blameless postmortems inside a company, right? People can derive the value that, hey, it should be a learning opportunity because blame is not really useful because the base assumption is that all software will go down. It flows the other way, and the artifacts can manifest themselves differently depending on who's interpreting that particular set of values. For example, being safe to fail can mean comprehensive and long test cases or quick feedbacks. It just depends on who's parsing it. Now, I love this. This is great. I use it every time, but there's a key component that's kind of missing here. Because it's not as if the basic assumptions that we have are hard-coded at birth or derived from thin air or just materialize out of nowhere. They come from experiences. Things that we saw, things that have been taught to us, things that we've experienced in other companies. And so the stack kind of looks like this. Artifacts are derived from values, or derived from assumptions, or derived from experiences. I'm going to be referring to this as the stack for the rest of the talk, just for simplicity. Now, the difficulty, of course, is that software is made of diverse groups of people with different stacks, different contents, and different things that they value and believe in, and we have a lot of exercises to navigate those. We have a lot of ways to do those, some of them low effort and some of them really, really hard. And sometimes we just take an intermediary step just to say, hey, you know what, this is not what I 100% buy into, but this is what's good for the team. But again, a lot of software development doesn't just rely on the work of one team. In fact, a lot of it relies on the work of multiple teams as part of a superset, each of them having settled on their own particular trade-offs and cadences. And a lot of the time, it's actually supersets of supersets, of which many are actually highly interconnected and very dependent on each other. And it really doesn't help that the mores that we have for interacting or unpacking the stacks of other people within other teams aren't that well developed, because for all intents and purposes, as a default, right, when we talk about things, we only uncover a part of that stack for the other person. Why do you believe in this particular thing? Why do you create this particular thing? What underlying experiences have informed that? And so often it breaks down and sometimes expresses itself in differences in software patterns or even like applications. We're basically talking about Conway's law here, which isn't all that bad. In fact, I think the move to microservice was an attempt to remedy some of that, but where it gets kind of dangerous and a little bit important to watch out for is when it results in social bifurcations over time. People having a default set of beliefs about a certain group of people, mainly because of the limited amount of interactions that you have. And this causes friction, and it gets harder and harder to talk to people who have developed certain assumptions about you. And this is a thing that will happen again and again and again. Now, I don't need to say that this is incredibly exhausting. And I'm going to be talking about a couple of mitigations about bridging the gap between groups of people, disparate groups of people that believe in different things within the software community. And it's formed around the central hypothesis, and because of the interconnectedness of the outputs that people have to the values and the experiences and the base assumptions that we have, it is entirely possible to construct better culture through better artifacts, right? Cool. So I'm going to be talking about community gardening. So what are the many ways that we can kind of like tackle this issue? I'm going to be using a lot of practical things, a lot of things actually derived from real life. So there's going to be a lot of screenshots, and a lot of them are going to be redacted. So I hope that's not incredibly annoying. I'm also going to be using gardening as a metaphor because, like many people in lockdown, I've over-indexed on buying a lot of plants just to see something alive. So, which is great. So what do I talk about when I talk about seeding? When I talk about seeding, I'm talking about positive feedback loops. What are the things that we can do to make more things similar to that kind of like happen? And effectively with the target state of creating intra-team patterns or formats for intra-team communications within a shared space, right? Because for all intents and purposes, Slack is kind of like an artifact, right? If you think about it, it functions similarly to an event stream where there's multiple subscribers trying to pull data, right, and actioning it within their own role or capability. And if you think about it, what a lot of new people actually do within a company is that they look at how people talk to each other. What's the patterns? How do I engage support? How do I talk to other people? How do I ask questions for the API team? And then they copy it, right? So a lot of the patterns that we have for talking to each other kind of propagate by itself. And we do this kind of thing unconsciously, right? Through the things that we choose to surface, or the way we ask questions, or even the way that we respond, right? This gets copied by other people and propagated again and again and again. So here's the question: what's possible if we inspect and create these patterns with a full awareness that they should have a particular intent? And I'm going to use incident reporting because it's one of the first things that I personally do. Where do you see the stuff that's broken? How do people talk about the stuff that's broken? Nice and easy. So here's a question, right? Like, you come into a company, you're new, it's day one, and you go to the incidents channel, and it's a bunch of posts like this, people just posting screenshots without any particular context and threads and just indexing on reactions. What would you derive about the particular values? What's important to the people that have created this messaging pattern about things that are broken? Right? Example 2. You arrive at a new company, and instead of seeing that big spray of like messages, you have this highly structured kind of like format, and there's actually a forum on the topic, and when you click on the topic, it prompts you for like 9 different fields that you have to fill in to be able to interact with it. I'll tell you what I kind of like derive from it, right? My basic assumption is that the person who made this probably has seen their share of incidents and probably values a lot of the information points that is over here, right? There's not a lot here as an artifact in terms of like how do you talk to other people or who do you reach out to, which means it's probably secondary as a priority. It's more there as an announcement piece. This is what I personally kind of like start with as an artifact. So there's a couple of things kind of like going on here in that the incident channel is separate because I would like to separate the use case of announcing it and letting people know what they need to know about the incident versus the discussion about remediating it. The second is that there's a very, very small set of fields because that's what I kind of index to. That's what I value. I value simple rules, right? And those are implicit in that artifact, but sometimes implicit doesn't quite cut it. We need to be explicit. Here's another artifact, a post-mortem, right? This is a screenshot from a postmortem that I just did a couple of weeks ago. And there's an explicit call out to a set of behaviors that everybody has to be able to do, or basic assumptions. For people who haven't done blameless postmortems before, it's basically using root cause analyses to find out the systemic issues that might have caused an incident, with the very express requirement that we do not talk about human error as a root cause. All right. Individual blame is not a useful artifact, and sometimes you need to be really, really explicit about it. These implications also exist just in the way that we format or the commonly agreed formats by how we talk to other people. You probably have a support team in your company that you contact for particular needs, for infrastructure. Maybe you don't, but maybe you do. And for example, this artifact, this way of talking to other people has an implication that, hey, I emoji this, someone owns your problem. There's a thread here, which means we value the attention economy of the other people in the channel by making sure they're not notified when it's not pertinent to them. Right. And these small choices exist. These hidden choices exist throughout just even the most banal of like interactions, even in the most innocuous ones that we didn't think would have an impact. It's there in the things that we choose to celebrate. It's there in the conversations that we choose to surface with the rest of the organization. What do we share, right? Because for all intents and purposes, the way that we structure our messages is an expression of intent. It says a lot implicitly by just how it's set up or how it's structured or how we think other people should consume it. Now, so I'm going to be talking about cultivation and trellises. When I talk about cultivation and trellises, what I mean is that now that we've set up a couple of norms about how people should talk to each other in a productive way, how do we make it actually kind of productive? How do we make it have impact? And the way that I'm going to frame this is with my favorite bugbears or least favorite bugbears, which is this communication pattern that you see a lot in organizations. Someone needs to talk to another team about a shared concern, right? Person one escalates their issue to a manager passes it on to another manager, and then it kind of gets passed on. And I loathe this for various reasons, but mainly the fact that it's time consuming and it's also very lossy. It's time consuming because you have to wait for multiple people to pass on the message. It's lossy because the people who are relaying information about the context are not the ones closest to the problem space. So I generally index a lot of like organizational communication structures to enable people closer to the problem space to be able to like collaborate and make decisions, right? Without anyone else being kind of like involved. For example, in a lot of companies, we frequently have questions of, hey, what should be the consistent way of like doing blah, right? Not the standard, but sort of like what's the default way that we do things. One of the artifacts that I like to use is called sensible defaults. So this is sensible defaults is basically a repo, and the repo has a couple of like folders that pertain to particular concerns, and each of them contain an MD file that says, hey, this is probably how we should do things by default in this particular area. It starts with a README, and the README looks like this, right? Always looks like this. When I've set this up across multiple companies, and it kind of starts the same. And side note, whenever you're creating communication patterns for disparate groups of people within an organization, it's really important that the rules are simple. Simple rules create complex, intelligent behavior. Complex rules create bullshit, so which is suboptimal. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So and the rules here is that basically, people who care about a certain thing make a pull request. Other people discuss it, and then sort of like if people agree, they kind of merge it. It looks a little bit like this. It lets people who care about certain things or really, really care about certain things drive policy or actually inform people or pass along knowledge, right? Hey, this is probably the way we should consider doing things. There's people who really care about security. Last week, I had the sensible default come through for accessibility, which is awesome. It's pretty sick. It also lets people who care about the problem space but think differently be able to unpack their stack, right? Why they believe differently and the underlying reasons for that, and to be able to reason about it in a space that's reasonably open, available to everybody. And it kind of just grows by itself, to be honest. It's pretty cool. A couple of bonus points is it's this is more of a side note. It's given a lot of teams some ability to be able to like push back on like things like, hey, we should do this as a tactical fix because they've been able to rationalize that, hey, you know, like this, we have a set of standards, pseudo standards around what constitutes production software. So we really can't do that as much as we'd like to. It's also a great onboarding tool. We just hand it to HR, and then they link it to newcomers. And who knew? Like the default way of doing things is one of the most important things that people probably want to know when they join an org. It's awesome. Second pattern is decision tech groups. And decision tech groups are very, very similar to a guild. You basically have a couple of people, representatives from a team. It doesn't matter how senior they are. They just have to care about it. And then we just talk about the shared space. And, you know, it doesn't have to be synchronous. It could just be like a couple of boards that happen every other week and talking about what's most important to everyone and their teams. And then we kind of like action those things. It's different from a guild in that it focuses on making decisions about those things, enabling people basically to make decisions, people close to the problem space to make decisions about the thing that they care the most about. And when the defaults need to change, they're the ones who discuss it and discuss what constitutes success for like a successful spike. Hey, if we want to add, for example, honeycomb to all of our stacks, this is probably what all of us would agree on is a minimum that we would like to have when we roll it out. It can be async and cheap. It doesn't need meetings. I definitely index on having less synchronous meetings as much as possible. It's also open to everyone, regardless of seniority, and there's some optionality and involvement. Not every problem needs to have everyone. Only the people who care about it. A couple of like bonuses: the fact that it's open, right? Like people can attend any decision group that they want to be in, empowers people and gives them a sense that, hey, if I'm in this organization and I would like something to change, I have very, very clear mechanisms and groups of people that I can consult, and it's a single hop. It's not this multiple hop nightmare where we have to like navigate bureaucracy. It's nice and straightforward. It's empowering. It's also a great pipeline for seniors because what happens when people turn seniors is they're suddenly allocated a big amount of like high level problem sets, and it's hard to navigate if like you're new to it. And what it gives non people who are newer to the industry is the muscle memory to be able to unpack smaller but wider problem sets and gain more confidence, and yeah, just to have the space to be good at it. Now, I talk about pruning because regardless of everything that we do, if we have decision groups or sensible defaults or GitHub or good norms in Slack, sometimes things go bad. And unfortunately, this is the thing I have the least amount of content on because I'm not even sure if I'm doing it right yet. Once I do, I'll talk to you about it. But right now, I don't know. I don't know if I'm doing this well. I will say two things though. From a community gardening perspective, if you take on that responsibility, that's a very different responsibility from participating in what do you call this, in the community. And to clarify that, what I mean is that when you're participating in a conversation, your set of responsibilities is uncovering the layers of your stack and making other people understand it, or trying to understand other people's stack experiences and the underlying values that they have. When you're moderating, your focus is making sure that people have the means to do it and that they do it well, and asking the right questions and not making default assumptions about people. The second is don't let things fester. It's particularly important, especially now that what do you call this? Everyone's a tiny little bit more separated. When things go bad or don't go well between like two people, it festers very, very quickly at an alarming rate. It's honestly like a little bit surprising. So as much as possible, stamp it out before it gets bad. It very quickly gets to the point where it's very, very difficult to repair. Now, finally, I'm going to talk about why this matters to you as a person, right? Kind of important to you as a person. For all intents and purposes, right? Trying to unpack or understand what other people believe, or sort of like why they think a certain way, and trying to accommodate that is basically, for all intents and purposes, empathy. But while it may be good from a community gardening perspective or even facilitating conversations perspective, the real value of it is actually for you. And I'm going to frame it like this. Let's say you had two systems in a company, right? Your company had two servers, and only one of them was publishing logs to your log indexer of choice, Splunk, Sumo Logic, what have you. It is entirely possible for someone to come in to the company and come to the conclusion that the only system that exists is the one that's outputting the information, right? It's only that one system. Now I'm gonna say something a little bit uncomfortable. There's in very much the same way. There's a very fundamental self-centeredness that comes with being alive. If you think about it, just actually think about it. This talk is happening at your ears, going through your headphones, being parsed by your brain, seen by your eyes, and if we're not careful, the default assumption is that we would derive from that is everything is all about me, which seems innocuous and not that critical. But let's frame it in real practical terms, right? Within the context of modern software development life, let's say you're reasonably successful ops person in a company, and you're tired from the night before because you were working late for some reason that you can't even remember. So you wake up at a respectable time, let's say 7 o'clock. Your phone rings, and there's an alert on your pager duty, and it's coming from a system that you haven't heard of before. And you come to the conclusion immediately that it's probably a legacy system. And like all legacy systems, the alert doesn't specify any means of identifying where the problem is or where the documentation is. So you sigh, you have your coffee, you prepare and then you sit down and you try to find the repository where it is. And of course, it's the last commit was 3 years ago, and the tests aren't there, and it's written in a language that kind of annoys you by default. So you try and fix it anyway. 9 o'clock comes in, and your manager messages you immediately on Slack, and they say, "Hey, I saw that you were working late last night. I think I'm gonna give you like a early day today. You should look after yourself." And you say, "Yeah, that's cool. That's cool." And then they say, "Hey, what are you doing?" So you try to explain it, and now you have to take the time away from trying to fix the problem to try to explain it to someone who probably can't do anything about the problem space. And it's a little bit annoying, but you do it anyway. And then your manager says, "Oh, it's really great that you're working on this problem, but we have a couple of cards that need to be delivered by the end of the week." All right. So you say, "Hey, is it a deadline?" And your manager says, "Oh no, but we really need it." So now you're kind of salty that your manager is giving you a day off, but at the same time asking for something to be delivered that you need extra hours to do. But you don't say that, of course. And then you proceed with the rest of your day, and you finally figure out the cause of the problem, and it's afternoon. And the card is assigned to you, and you feel some sort of indebtedness to your teammates, so you decide to work on it. And maybe just this one time I'll do 1 extra hour instead of going late. But that doesn't happen, and by the time you look at it, it's already like 9 p.m. And when you go to sleep, it's your brain's still on, so you can't sleep. Which leaves you more tired the next day. And this happens again and again and again and again. And within the lens of self, the lens of us, by default, having all those inputs only pertaining to us, it is not impossible. In fact, it is blameless to think that, hey, about how deeply unfair it all is, and how hurtful and tiring and how exhausting it is, the things that are happening right now, right? Every single day. And I'm going to propose a different frame on that doesn't come with that default, the frame that comes around interrogating other people's stacks. Because it is entirely possible to think that, hey, the person who wrote that particular alert, or the particular documentation that existed, probably was under duress more significantly than you are, and just did everything that they could with the information that they had during the time, right? The technology that existed 3 years ago. And maybe your manager is just kind of like really awkward at navigating that space of reporting to shareholders and generating capital, but at the same time really caring about you as a person. And it's a little bit weird, but fundamentally they really care. Or maybe it's a choice of thinking that, hey, by working late nights, maybe I'm presenting a standard or a baseline that not everyone in the team is able to meet, because they have real life obligations that they can't steer away from. And maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Now, none of that is maybe true. It's entirely possible that your manager is just annoying. But the only thing that's true is you get to make a choice on what by default to think about, right? And I want to take a step back here, because I'm not moralizing. I'm not the wise old fish or anything like that. This is not coming from a space where I would like you to do it because it's good. This is because a lot of times I actually forget to do this. And some days I actually don't want to. But maybe just by the virtue of the awareness that there is a choice, sometimes if you have the capacity for it, that the choice sometimes exists to interrogate other people's stacks, right? And to change that default frame by which we view the outputs, the experiences, and the underlying values that kind of exist out there. Maybe that's more kind to us as human beings. And maybe it's critical not from a software development context, from a productivity, or not even from a community kind of point of view, but just us people being to navigate the trenches of day-to-day life. Thank you so much. These are the references I'd love. So that's all I have. I hope there was a set of things that I wanted to say, and I hope that got through. Thank you.
Hey, John, thank you so much for your talk. There's so many amazing things in there that I went, ouch, oh, I'm doing that. I've stopped doing that. I need to start doing that. So thank you very much. We did have a question come through in the chat. Is there a public example of your sensible default repo or similar anywhere you are aware of?
No, not quite. I can generate one actually. It's the value of the repo isn't the contents of the repo itself, as much as it's being able to relay to people that there is a way to surface things that you really care about and have them be known across an organization and have it have impact instead of it just living in our own heads. So, but I will post a link. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, John. One of my key takeaways from all these talks is that we're all still people. If AI really did exist, we wouldn't need a conference for humans. We could just put the computers together and, hey, isn't that the Matrix? Oops, sorry, cross promotion there. But yes, we're people, and we need to remember that everyone around us is still people. Yeah. Oh, we've got a question. Tell us about the guitars.
Okay. You know what? I love talking about this. So this is actually my side hustle, which is creating weird hipster, monstrosities from reclaimed wood. So this is a Frankencaster. So yeah, and a lot of them have been modified slightly. So yeah.
Amazing. What's the timber you've reclaimed?
It's a sycamore, I believe. Is the original designation. Not really the best for tone woods, but it looked awesome. So aesthetics, function, I don't know.
Excellent. Maybe it'll end up on a movie set somewhere where it looks really good, but the actual actor's not playing it, and then it's a different riff behind it. Excellent. We've got about another 5 minutes. If anyone's got another question they wanted to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a GNL guitar at the back as well. To answer Tom Eastman, thank you so much. So play us a song. I'm so nervous right now. So my fingers aren't quite up to the task, but thank you.
Excellent. I've only just seen 2 acrylic guitars on a Canberra bidding site that I've sent across to a friend who plays the guitar, saying you need both of these, but it looks really weird that the clear acrylic with just the strings in the air.
Yeah, I know, right? But it doesn't look quite right. But apparently they sound the same, so it's okay.
They all sound the same if I'm holding them in my hands. Bad.
Awesome. Hell yeah.
We don't have any more questions at this point,
cool.
So I think we should start a poll for what do you want him to play?
Unfortunately, all my guitars have weird tunings. So, yeah, So this was like a weird project guitar that I made, which is a Woody Guthrie reference, by the way, like this sticker. He was a folk singer in 1945 who sang about what do you call this, the struggles of like people back in the day, and sort of like I was really into folk during the time, and that's why it looks like that. And yeah, so yeah, I don't. But that's all I have. Sorry.
That's all right. Thank you, John. It would put you on the spot there.
Yeah, no worries. All good.
Excellent. Thank you for your amazing talk this afternoon. John is available too in the post-conference chat. If John, maybe you can convince him to play over there. If he's not going to play here, maybe he'll play in the chat. But yeah, thanks, John, for joining. Thanks, everybody. We'll now have a room changeover, and we'll be back very shortly. Bye for now.
Have a good one.